Hey folks, it's Brian back again for a new weekly topic. I know I'm a few days late this week. Let me first just apologize for that. What happened is I had surgery last week and I figured I would be fine. And generally I was feeling pretty good when I normally record, but I just couldn't get my voice together. I sounded terrible. The body just was not quite cooperating. So that pushed me back a couple of days, but getting in the weekly topic at the end of the week here. So I'm excited to share with you again today. And next week I should be back to a normal schedule. But let's go ahead and get into today's topic. I'm going to cover an important topic for any type of process improvement or optimizing within your business. And this is a topic of change management. Change management is really about looking at changes that you're making in your business and making sure that you're changing the right things, that the right people know about those changes, and that when you make those changes, they stick around. If you don't go in and make a concerted effort to make changes stick, they will start to fall apart. People will revert to old habits, revert to old patterns. And so, especially when you're making a big change, you've got to put in some level of change management to make sure that those changes stick and become the new habits for the future. So let's go ahead and get into it. So in the world of systems thinking and business process improvement, you cannot improve your business, you cannot improve systems, you cannot improve processes without change. If you're always doing what it is you're doing today, you're always going to get those same results. So if you want to optimize, you want to get more effective, you want to get more efficient, or you want to get more productive, you've got to make changes to your process steps and to your inputs if you want to see different results. Now, anytime you make a change in your business, you've got to think about it from different angles. These changes that you make might have employee impacts, probably always are going to have at least some level of employee impacts. And even if you're just a solo entrepreneur, changes in your business are still going to impact you. So it's still useful to go through this exercise and think about, I'm changing this thing in my business. What are the impacts to me? What are the impacts to other employees that are either in my business or on my team that I need to be aware of and take into consideration as I go through optimizing and changing what it is we're doing? The other angle you want to make sure to cover is impacts to your customers. Changing things within your business at times are going to impact your customers, and your customers are going to need to be aware of that change. They might need to do things differently because of a change that you're making. And so you want to think through the employee side and then think through the customer side. What's changing and how are those changes potentially impacting those two groups? Now, impacts can come in many different forms, and you'll have to think through that for your business. The size of your business is going to matter. The industry that you're in is going to matter. The process or system that you're changing is going to matter. All of these different variables are going to have some influence over how big of a change or how big of an impact a change is going to have. So you'll have to consider that on a case-by-case basis. And as you think through that, you'll be able to start to identify patterns and realizations of how changes are impactful for you, for your situation, for your business, for your team. Now, when you think through the impacts, it's really easy to identify the direct impacts. If you're changing a process, you can look at what employees have to do different that actually run that process or are involved in that process. Those are usually pretty easy to identify. And that's the first thing you want to do, is look at who is directly impacted by this change that I'm about to make in my business. What becomes more difficult, and a lot of people skip this step, is thinking about the second, third, fourth, fifth level of impacts that might happen because of a change that you make in your business. So let's talk through an example to understand what that might look like. So let's say you've reached a point where in your company, you've grown to a certain size, you've got employees that are buying things throughout the month to do their jobs, different equipment. It could be computers, monitors, office supplies, could be products if you're manufacturing things. It could be the resources that you use. But just as an example, let's say you've reached a point where you're buying a lot of things in your business and you want to introduce a procurement function into that business. When you talk about adding a procurement function, you're now talking about having a person or a team that is responsible for either helping your employees buy things or buying on behalf of your employees. And you can imagine adding a function like that to your business is going to have some pretty direct impacts to the employees that you already have in your business. They're used to buying something on their own credit card and submitting an expense, or maybe they just come to you as the owner and say, hey, I need a new monitor or I need a new computer for this new employee that we're starting, and you swipe a credit card and you make the purchase. Now you're at a point where you want to centralize this function of procurement. Anybody that normally buys things in your business is going to be directly impacted because you're changing the way that stuff gets acquired for your business. So that's that first level, the direct impact, pretty easy to identify. Of course, this new person is going to buy stuff, not you anymore. That's pretty easy to identify. But now ask yourself, what is the impact of that impact? Okay, so if you're familiar with the tool of 5 whys, I've covered this on previous conversations. It's very similar to the 5 whys. I don't know if I'm coining this new term, but I'm going to call it the 5 impacts. Very similar concept, very similar mental model. The 5 whys is used to understand root cause by repeatedly asking yourself 5 whys. Why is this happening? Why is that happening? Why is that happening? With the 5 impacts, it's the same kind of process. We have this impact of now employees are going to buy through a procurement person. What is the impact of that impact? Well, and this is just an example, right? I'm just making this up as an example, but as an example, you could say the person now has to have a 3 to 5 day lead time. Whereas in the past, maybe they needed a new laptop for a new employee. They just went to Best Buy's website, they bought a laptop and it showed up the next day. Now there's a 3 to 5 day window that is going to appear because they've got to work with this procurement team, and it's actually going to slow down the process of buying a new laptop for an employee. So that would be an impact of the impact. And now ask yourself again, well, what is the impact of a 3 to 5 day lead time needed to acquire a new laptop? Well, now my HR person needs to be a little bit more aware. They need to plan a little bit better so that they give the manager or the person making this purchase that 3 to 5 day lead time for a new employee. So you start to ask yourself, okay, what is this impact? Okay, what is the impact of the impact? And you continue to go down until you feel like you've covered all of the impacts that are happening because of that change that you're making. And so that's what I mean when I talk about understanding second level, third level, fourth level, and so on impacts. You've got to figure out the pieces and the connectivity between the pieces in your business to understand how a change is going to impact not just the people directly, but also people indirectly as well. So let's talk through an approach that you can use to actually use this in your business or team. The first thing you want to do anytime you're making the change is you want to make sure you understand what the change is. And that's important because you won't always be involved in all of the decisions of the change. And this, of course, when you're a small company, a small business, not quite as applicable. But as your business grows, or if you're part of a large organization, you might be brought in to help manage a change, but you don't necessarily understand what the change is or why it's happening. So the first thing you want to do is make sure you've got a good grounding in what is being changed and why it's being changed and the mechanics of what's changing. You'll need to know that in order to help communicate that to the people that will be impacted. Next thing you want to do is make a plan. Start assessing the impacts of the impacts. Go through a 5 impacts assessment and figure out who's going to be impacted, how they're going to be impacted. And that will then allow you to start to plan, how are you going to deal with those different impacts? And that assessment becomes important because it's going to help you identify gaps that you might have that are created by this change that you're creating. Those gaps, if you don't fill them, will cause you problems later on as you continue to try and run your business and you don't have a gap filled. It will create lots of headaches for you. So better to identify those early on and be able to address those as part of your change management. It's important to identify the people that will be impacted as well. Not just the individuals, but think about the roles that they play. Not just Frank, but Frank's job. What is his role? Anybody else in that role will also be impacted potentially. You're thinking about customers as well as employees. And it's important that you start to involve them as early as possible in the process of the change. Not just the change management, but the change itself. The more you can involve people that will be impacted by the change, the better your solutions are going to be, because they're going to help give you input on how to make the change work well and get the outcomes that you want. They're also going to become advocates for you as the change rolls out. As they start to believe in the change, they're going to go tell other people, hey, we're making this change and I think it's really good because it's going to help save us money that we're spending every month on buying all this stuff. They're just going to make it easier overall for you to deploy changes when you can get them some advanced warning and get them bought into those changes earlier before you roll it out to everybody else that's impacted. It's also important to communicate often with those that will be impacted by the change. So make sure you have a good communications plan and that you're giving the right information out to people at the right times. As part of that, you want to make sure you have different mediums that you're using to communicate, especially if it's a large change. Now, if you're making a tiny change that impacts 2 people, you don't need to do that much. You understand those 2 people, what they need to know, you communicate that to them, and you're good. If you're implementing a change that's going to impact hundreds of employees, or a change that's going to impact a lot of your customer base, what you need to consider is everybody processes information differently. And so if all you do is put out a bunch of written communication and that's it, your kinetic learners, your visual learners, your audio learners are going to struggle with understanding the change and understanding what they need to do differently. So think about different mediums for communicating change. You might put out some print or written communication, whether it's emails or text messages or messages in whatever collaboration tools you're using, Slack, Teams, etc. You might consider doing short videos, record a short video and talk about the change. Hey, this change is coming. This is why it's happening. This is what's important to us. This is the new process, etc. There are lots of different ways that you can consider communicating change to your organization, to the people that are impacted, and leverage at least a few different types of communication styles or methods so that the change can be communicated well to a broad audience or different types of learners. And then the last thing I would say is part of how you go through this is get feedback often and don't be afraid to make adjustments. So as soon as you make that change, you want to start gathering feedback from the folks that are impacted. How is this change going? What's working well? What's not working well? Are there unanticipated problems that you're having? Start getting that feedback and then continue to make refinements and adjustments so that you can optimize what it is you're doing and get those outcomes that you're looking for. That covers it for me today. I appreciate you tuning in. Again, I apologize for being a few days late this week. But we'll be back to the normal schedule next week. As always, if you have any questions about anything that I've covered, or you're considering some change in your organization and want to talk about it, go ahead and email me at brian@optimizeforoutcomes.com, or reach out to me on your preferred social network and let's have a chat. Thanks, and I will see you online.